Well, hello and welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. We're here for another jam-packed, action-filled information overload just for you. We're going to start off today. Of course, we really got about two themes that we're really going to be working with today. But before we do anything else, we're going to take a look at the weather. Periodically, we have been playing Joe Bastardi from Weather Bell Analytics. We've been playing, occasionally we'll throw in one of his daily updates. And we don't do it every week, we don't do it all the time, but there are a few episodes where he actually starts talking about what we're going to be seeing in the next couple of months in the upper Midwest. And on February 13th, so that was, Tuesday, he came out with his outlook for the next 6 to 8 weeks. So let's go and take a look right now at Joe Bastardi from Weather Bell Analytics.
Weather Bell Analytics, meteorologist Joe Bastardi, your daily update. What is this? This is a day 16 500 millibar forecast. What's happening here is that you see this fierce area of red is backing up, and as it backs up, a trough is going to back up and reform over the United States for much of the merry month of March. Okay, so we got March mayhem on the way. I know it's people used to March Madness. This is March mayhem. All right, and this is something that I thought would start late in February from back in January. I think it's delayed, not denied. And I think we're going to the blend of the last 3 Marches where there was a lot of blocking, 1996, 2011, 2013, and that produced this type of temperature configuration. And you can see the U.S. models going to that. This is the CFSV2, the climate model, the last 28 runs, the last 12 runs, the last 4 runs, and the last single run, all looking colder and colder here as you keep factoring in newer model runs. There's an interesting little situation going on with the snow here. This is through day 4, and through day 6, watch what happens. Now, what happens is a cold high comes across, and it's attacked by low pressure going by to the south, and this could indeed lead to a surprise snowstorm in what is a warm pattern in this area of the country. It's very warm down in the southeast, but if it snows within the next week in New York City, for instance, in spite of it being above normal, it wouldn't surprise me. After all, you get rainstorms sometimes. If it's below normal, the one day it happens to precipitate, it goes above normal and rains, and then it gets cold again. Here's the upcoming 5 days of temperatures, the 6 to 11, and then you see the connection starting to be made here in the 11 to 16. Total precipitation, we continue to finally have the La Nina signal here with all this heavy precip from Texas up into the northeast. And the reason this is a classic La Nina signal is that you like to have a ridge in the southeast and the cold air coming into the west and getting into a fight over here. Unfortunately, at the end of the year, the end of the wintertime, many La Ninas, you get the blocking going on. That then pushes the jet back south for a while, and you get the wild end game, and then we can all, tiptoe through the tulips in spring. And here is the actual amounts of precipitation. So that area in the Tennessee Valley is reversing dramatically. That's it for now. Enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you've got.
And so that's what we're up against. More cold weather coming in. It's not going to be quite as frigid as it was in December. But when you see that last thing that he had shown, that last snowstorm, this time in the Tennessee Valley, that pretty much signifies that spring will be right away, coming right after that. I remember in 2013, when that La Nina year happened, I was coming back from New Mexico, and that snowstorm, we ended up, my traveling companion and I ended up hitting that snowstorm in Iowa, and it was a mess. But then after that, spring came right afterwards. So spring is almost here. We had Groundhog Day already. Now the meteorologist says that spring is around the corner. Now it's just a matter of the time to get here. So that's where we're at for this winter season. We're going to move on over to our Prager University segment of today, and that is Guy Benson. I'm gay, conservative, so what?
I'm a Christian, a patriotic American, and a free market, shrink the government conservative, who also happens to be gay. What I mean by that is, my values define me, while my sexual orientation sometimes feels more like, well, a footnote. Literally, in fact. I came out as gay in a footnote in my book, End of Discussion. When it comes to my political beliefs, my orientation is only one part of the story. It's not the totality of who I am. Some unimaginative leftists like to claim that this qualifies me as a self-hating gay person. This is so boring. That intellectual laziness only underscores my point. Far too often, people are sorted by their gender, or their skin color, or their sexual orientation, or any other immutable characteristic that has nothing to do with ideas or values. To be candid, in my day-to-day life and work, I spend a lot more time thinking and writing about the failures of Obamacare, for example, than I do about LGBT issues, whatever that term might mean on any given day. Just like any conservative, I want taxes low, the military strong, and don't even get me started on single-payer healthcare or late-term abortion. I'm a conservative because when I think about these issues critically, I usually end up on the right end of the spectrum. It's that simple. Here's the thing. I fully recognize how fortunate I am to live in a time and a country where I can be openly gay and live a normal life. And that's in large part thanks to the hard work of gay rights activists who've paved the way for people like me, people who had it much harder than I do, and people who likely wouldn't share my politics. I am genuinely grateful to them. But it's a new era now. Why ostracize members of our community who don't toe the left-wing political line? Exit polling shows that in the last 4 general elections, between 14 and 29% of LGBT voters pulled the lever for the GOP. That's a lot of us. Now, does that mean that we all support every element of the party's platform? Absolutely not. In fact, I know that many conservatives, including some here at PragerU, don't see eye to eye with me on all of these questions. And yet, here I am, making a PragerU video, which perfectly illustrates another really important point. Conservatives are often much more tolerant of dissenting views than those who fancy themselves the torch carriers of open-mindedness. Nope. Cross the left on a hot-button social issue, and you're out. You see, some on the left believe that they're entitled to control the thoughts or votes of certain groups of people, namely minorities and so-called victim groups. For some, it comes down to a cynical calculation. Without the overwhelming support of those groups, the Democrats would win very few elections. That's why the left lashes out so viciously at anyone who wanders off their assigned reservation. I suspect conservative women and Hispanics and African Americans know exactly what I'm talking about. The truth is, the left isn't entitled to a damn thing. To paraphrase my co-author and friend Mary Catherine Ham, we didn't get liberated in order to be told by liberal activists precisely what we're allowed to think or how we must vote. A free-thinking, free citizen of a free country is not obliged to believe anything because someone else believes he or she ought to think, or ought to vote, or ought to rank his or her priorities a certain way. Look, I get it. Many other gay people approach these issues and their voting criteria differently, and I respect that. That's their call, even if it's not how I choose to operate. What's the phrase again? Live and let live? Why has that been turned on its head into agree or else? Let's debate issues and stop trying to punish wrong thinking. Like I said, I'm a Christian, a patriotic American, and a free market, shrink the government conservative who happens to be gay. That's how I choose to rank my priorities. You know what that's called? It's called progress. I'm Guy Benson for Prager University.
So that's what he calls progress. Now we're going to take a look at what somebody else recently had thought was progress, but really necessarily sure that he has. Again, we're talking about athletes now. We get the Olympics going on, athletes on a big stage, and instead of letting their athletic abilities shine forth, they have to open their mouths and screw it up. That's happened at the Olympics too. So we're going to take a look here at one openly gay Olympian who has no inclination of meeting the vice president.
List. Please see me and give me a business card or an email address.
He's had an amazing season so far this year, and I think that he's, well, I think on the matter pretty clear. I don't think that I have any inclination toward a meeting. I think that in terms of distractions, as my previous question would be, that would be a much bigger distraction for me, and right now I'm just focusing on competing, but I'm very excited to be here and representing the U.S. and the LGBT community, and I'm very happy to meet Adam, and we got to hang out at opening ceremonies, and I think he's just a tremendous guy. And otherwise, yeah, I'm just kind of focusing on skiing, and that's about it. Well, I guess we'll see how I handle it, but I think I've actually always been someone that's had to compartmentalize my life because I was in the closet, and I was always at fear of outing myself, and I always had so much going on in my mind, and I couldn't share it with anyone, and so I actually feel like now that I'm out, I have less to compartmentalize, and although I have made it very clear who I am, and I think that I've taken a step into sort of a leadership role for the LGBT community because there isn't a ton of representation at the games, it's also just me, and I'm just being myself, so it's almost easier than ever to be here and be competing and just feel free and liberated, and I'm excited for Adam and all the other out athletes here, and it's an amazing time to be at the Winter Games.
It's working sort of like the Wi-Fi, on and off.
Absolutely, yeah. I actually don't know how that Tongolese guy did that because it was freezing. We had our incredible Ralph Lauren apparel, and it was heated, and even with that, I think it was still pretty cold. So I've got a lot of respect for that guy going out with nothing on. And sure, I would happily do that, but I think that there are more aptly suited people to bear the flag, and like this is Kelly Clark's 5th Olympics. There's so many people that have insane legacies, and I'm definitely proud of what I've done, but I don't know. I doubt I would be the flag bearer even if I made it to another games, but I'll take my shirt off if I get it. What was the question?
How do you see at him and do the
I think we can all agree that it's very difficult to get here. One Olympics alone is hard, and to be at the top of your game 4 years later is very difficult, so I have a ton of respect for all the athletes that are competing in their 4th and 5th games. It's just unbelievable to me. But yeah, it feels good. I feel like I've got a little bit more pressure and a little bit more expectation this time around, but also a ton of support, and I'm just really, really happy to be here with all these guys and part of Team USA.
Now, of course, we're kind of coming in the middle of a dialogue here. I say dialogue because the left always says we need to have a conversation, but it's always a monologue, so I'm going to have a monologue in rebuttal. The fact is, to come out and say that I have no inclination of meeting the U.S. Vice President, but I don't want that to be a distraction from my skiing. It's a distraction simply because, why? Because you want it to be a distraction? There's another gay Olympian who has turned down a meeting with the vice president, and that is Adam Rippon. And we're going to take a look briefly at his statement.
You know, as an athlete, you're really given a unique platform. I am a proud gay American, and I think it's really important, especially in this political climate, that we stand for what we think is right.
We stand for what we think is right. Is it more important to be a gay athlete or an American athlete? That's the question that these two guys have to answer themselves. Because if you take a look, well, I'll get into that in just a moment, what I was thinking of. This would have been a big deal about 25 years ago, honestly. The only reason it's a big deal today is because these guys are opening their mouths. Nobody really cares about the sexual orientation. Sorry, we don't care about what you're doing behind closed doors after hours. We really don't. It was big news back when Ellen DeGeneres announced that she was a lesbian, that everyone kind of already knew that. Gay Olympic athletes. I know members of the U.S. Olympic team who play in the WNBA. Brittany Griner has been out for a long time, and she's a gay Olympic athlete. So what's the big deal? What the big deal becomes, just like we saw with Colin Kaepernick, the big deal becomes about politics, not about their own personal sexual orientation. They're trying to make a political statement in a time when they shouldn't be making a political statement, but they should be standing with their fellow Olympic athletes. So now, of course, the vice president, who is the leader of the U.S. delegation, at least for the opening ceremonies and some of the early games, he went over there for it. He was our representative. And it's the president and vice president's purview to do so. If Joe Biden would have been there, or Barack Obama, wouldn't be a big deal. They'd be opening them with open arms. But these two choose to make this a distraction because of their politics, not because of the sexual orientation. And that, again, kind of like we saw with the NFL, that detracts from the purpose of the game. Personally, if I were the head of the U.S. Olympic Committee, I don't care how talented they are, if you're going to disrespect the position of the Vice President or President of the United States, I'm going to ship your butt home on the next plane over. And same with the guy who had a hissy fit because he didn't get the chance to carry the flag in the opening ceremonies. You know what? You don't need to be an Olympic athlete, because there's other people who are just as deserving as you, who are next in line to compete for your position. Lindsey Vonn is another one. She may be a talented athlete, but the fact is, if you're going to disrespect the leadership of this country as an Olympic athlete and use your platform to open your mouth and insert foot, maybe you don't deserve to be on the Olympic team. You can go ahead and turn pro if there is a professional form of your sport. But to come out and use the Olympic Games, which is supposed to bring worldwide unity, you're trying to be politically divisive with it. Sorry, it's not going to fly. It shouldn't fly. Anyhow, now Adam Rippon says that this shouldn't detract. Let's take a look.
I have no problem talking about, what I've said, because I stand by it. But I think right now, the Olympics are about Olympic competition and the athletes involved. And I talked to you about how I felt before the games, and it's brought a lot of attention to and questions to my other teammates, and I don't want to distract from their Olympic experience, and I don't want my Olympic experience to be about Mike Pence. I want it to be about my amazing skating and being America's sweetheart.
Hi, this is.
All right, so now you don't want it to distract the Mike Pence to be a distraction. Then why are you even doing this? Why not just meet with them, show the office of the vice president some respect, and then move on with your skating, and let this be about what a fabulous skater you are. That's a much better solution than having to make a political statement. Now, of course, going into the political statement, they're all mocking Pence because of his Christian values. That's what it comes down to. That, he's a Christian, therefore I can't meet with him. Well, take a look at the fact that Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism are really some of your four biggest religions in the world. And I can't speak for Hinduism, but I do know that Christianity, Islam, and Judaism accounts for 71% of the entire world's religious population. 71%. And they're opposed, I'm looking doctrinally speaking, that they are opposed to homosexualism. That's tenets of those religions. So you're going to criticize Christianity and the Christian vice president because of your values when the vice president is actually more tolerant than you are. At the same time, you can go ahead and skate or shake hands with a Muslim who, if he is a practicing religion of his faith, should also be opposed to you. And same thing with a Jew. If you're a Jew, well, if you're living according to God's covenant and God's word, you should be opposed to being a gay. So it's okay to be friends with a Muslim and friends with a Jew, but not friends or meet with a Christian because of the Christian's viewpoints on gay marriage. That tells me that Adam Rippon has the problem. That tells me that I can never remember the other guy's name. Literally, his first name is Guy, the other athlete, the skier. These guys are the ones who have the problem. And again, if you're going to make politics on the U.S. Olympic team the subject, then you don't need to be there. You just don't. Just go home and give your opportunity to somebody else more deserving. Now, because of Christianity, Joy Behar from The View had to sound off. And this should be something that upsets. I'll pull up real quick list of religious populations. This is as of 2012. 2.3 billion adherents to Christianity throughout the world for 31.2% of the world's population. So that's how many people that Joy Behar's comments should be offending. Well, let's take a look. And before we play the clip, in the interest of knowledge, we are playing a clip from somebody from the Moms March, and it's simply because it's the only way I was able to actually isolate the two small segments from The View in order to present to you today.
Hi, this is Kimberly Fletcher with Homemakers for America and the Moms March movement, sharing with you a little bit of information that you may not know about because you probably, like me, do not watch The View. But a lot of people do, and I still don't know why. This week, Joy Behar, one of the hosts, joked about Vice President Mike Pence's Christian faith, saying it was a mental disorder because he talks to Jesus. Here she is in her own words.
I don't know if I want that. It's one thing to talk to Jesus. It's another thing when Jesus talks to you.
Exactly. Okay, well, that's different.
That's different. That's called mental illness, if I'm not correct.
But I'm
hearing voices.
This is just more proof of why shows like The View are completely out of touch with reality in the majority of women in America. But there's more.
My question is, can he talk to Mary Magdalene without his wife in the room?
This is Joy making fun of what I have now labeled the Pence rule, which is just smart and common sense, especially in today's world. The vice president said that he has made it a practice not to be alone with a woman unless it's his wife. So apparently if you communicate with God and he answers your prayers and you love and respect your spouse and are committed to your marriage, then you have a mental disorder.
So that is what Joy Behar from The View had to say. And that should be insulting to every single Christian out there. Because a person's faith is something that you should not mess with. And how many times have we been told, not to insult the Prophet Muhammad? Anytime you utter something against the Prophet Muhammad, President Obama would get upset about that. And yet, should Vice President Pence not have the right to get just as upset over dumb comments from The View? Well, he actually did. Here's Vice President Pence in his rebuttal.
I actually heard that ABC has a program that compared my Christianity to mental illness. And I'd like to laugh about it, but I really can't. I mean, Mike, I'm a believer. Like tens of millions of Americans today will have ash on their foreheads to mark the beginning of Lent. Overwhelming majority of Americans cherish their faith. And we have all different types of faith in this country. But I have to tell you, to have ABC maintain a broadcast forum that compared Christianity to mental illness is just wrong. And it's an insult not to me, but to the vast majority of the American people who, like me, cherish their faith. I mean, my Christianity is the most important thing in my life. I try and start every day by opening the good book. My wife and I try and have a prayer together before I leave every morning. I can honestly tell you my faith sustains me in all that I do. And it's just a regular part of our lives. But I'm not unusual. I think I'm a very typical American. Whatever your faith tradition, people understand that. But I just think it demonstrates how out of touch some in the mainstream media are with the faith and values of the American people, that you could have a major network like ABC permit a forum for invective against religion like that. And I call them out on it, not because of what was said about me, but it's just simply wrong for ABC to have a television program that expresses that kind of religious intolerance. And we're better than that. Our country's better than that. And you're better than that. And I'd like to be lied about it, but I really can't. Not for my sake, but for the tens of millions of Americans who cherish their faith. I can't be silent.
Now, if you go back to our beginning clip from Prager University with Guy Benson, and he talks specifically about the intolerance of the left. We are seeing the intolerant left right here in the way that Vice President Mike Pence is being treated because of his faith by Olympic athletes and by mainstream media. That's what's happening. That's the tolerance that we hear from the ones. I mean, honestly, I've heard so many people from, oh, you need to be tolerant. You need to be tolerant. Well, those on the right are actually more tolerant than the left, and that is being seen right here. Because if Mike Pence wants to pray, let him pray. Doesn't concern anybody else. Oh, but he's the vice president, he's in power. Who did Obama pray to? Doesn't matter. If it's behind closed doors and he's praying to Mecca or he's praying to the Christian God, it doesn't matter. What matters for a politician is whether or not they're doing the right thing for the country. That's what matters more than what they choose for their personal faith. And that's what these people miss. This comes the intolerance of the left of you have to believe the way we believe, otherwise you're nothing. That's your modern Democratic Party for you. Now, I'm going to show you right here. This is what is the way things should be. We're going to play two clips from Adam Rippon. The first one was from 2003. 2003. He was 13 years old at the time. And you look at the excitement in his eyes and you look at the talent that he had back then. Let his skating talents come through. And then the other one is going to be just about his current style in the Olympics. The thing is, if he's talking about skating, he's fine. I have no problem with him. It's when he opens his mouth about politics that we have the problem. So let's take a look from the video vault. A 13-year-old Adam Rippon eyes the Olympics.
He's only been skating for 3.5 years, but 13-year-old Adam Rippon has a lifetime of experiences. Last month in Luxembourg, Rippon took first place at the International Skating Union Spring Cup. For Adam, the trip was a series of firsts.
The plane ride, it was my first plane ride, so that was pretty exciting. And then as soon as we got into Amsterdam, I had my first train ride to Luxembourg. And then I had my first day of practice. And then the next thing I knew, it was like the short program, and I skated pretty well there. I got second in the short. And then the next day it was the long program, and I won that. And in the program I had like a triple and 2 double axels. It was the first time I did a triple in kind of competition, so I was really excited as soon as I did that.
After winning the competition in Luxembourg, Rippon and his mother celebrated with a 2-week vacation in Europe, checking out Italy, the Eiffel Tower in Paris, London, and even a little bit of the Olympic spirit in Switzerland.
Well, after we went to Lausanne and we saw the Olympic Museum, and then when you see like all these things about other people who won the Olympics and everything, you think that you've done a great thing, but you're still so far away.
Humbly spoken, and probably true. An Olympic dream is still far off in the distance, but Adam has come a long way in a short time, and Rippon clearly understands that good footwork only comes by doing your homework.
Like all the little things that your coach tells you, you always have to remember them, and you always have to try not to overdo it, just to do it. So as long as you remember everything your coach tells you, you'll be okay.
Some good old-fashioned advice from a young man who's so good, he'll make your head spin. In Pittston Township, Jim Coles, Newswatch 16 Sports.
I brought it up to my choreographer and he was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I didn't hear from him for a week. And then when I showed up to do the choreography, he was like, all right, I have it cut. I'm like, really? Well, when I was younger, I think I always wanted to skate to music that I had seen my idols skate to. Like, and that music would just get in my head. And I think now, being older, I want to skate to something that nobody else has. I want to skate to something that's a little trashy, but really fun. Because that's who I am. I'm a little trashy and I'm a little fun. I want to do something that's original and that you really haven't heard before and that it's kind of out of the box. I think the challenge is finding something that still sounds like a competitive piece and not like you just turned on Top 40 radio. I have an amazing team of people that I work with, choreographers, dancers, coaches, who all kind of help me, and they lead me to that right piece of music that's for me, that kind of nobody else can do. Nobody else has like the guts to skate to that music.
So there you have it. That's the way Adam Rippon. I mean, I wish the kid well. I honestly do. Good luck in the remaining medal rounds of the figure skating competition in the 2018 Winter Olympics. Good luck. You still represent the country. And so I'm still going to cheer you on if I happen to, I actually watched one of the Olympic events, and I thought he is a fabulous skater. It's the first time I'd actually watched him skate before. I had watched a couple of, I watched the entire venue. And when I'd seen the others that he competed against, I thought that Rippon actually was the best skater of the bunch. Now, according to the rules, I mean, there's a little controversy surrounding him, figures, based upon the scoring, but he didn't have quite as challenging a routine as the two others who had fallen, and so therefore he finished third. He's a bronze medalist now. Congratulations on the bronze medal. He didn't try a quad or quadruple. He didn't try one of those, and therefore, his technical score was not quite as high as it may have been if he would have attempted that, whereas the other ones did. The guy from Canada and the guy from the Olympic athletes from Russia. But the fact is, you're still representing the United States, and I'm an American, and I will cheer you on. That's the way I feel about all of our Olympic athletes. But I will say this for the record, as somebody who is of 50% Finnish heritage, that if this kind of stuff continues, I am going to start breaking out all my Finnish ski team gear and my Finnish figure skating gear and say, come on, Sisu, go Finns. But we're not quite at that point yet. But for the American Olympic team, I wish all of you the best of success for the rest of the games. Moving on, of course, we got a story that came out back in October. Once a president leaves office, they do have their portraits painted, and they get to choose who they want to have their likeness painted by. And so here was the announcement of the black artists who were selected to create the official presidential portraits of the Obamas.
For the first time in history, 2 black artists will create official presidential portraits for the Smithsonian. The Obamas selected Kendi Wiley and Amy Sherrill to paint their portraits that will hang in the National Portrait Gallery. Now, Wiley will paint President Barack Obama. He's best known for his portraits of young black men that channel classical works. His work has been featured in countless galleries, and he even received a mention on the show Empire. Amy Sherrill will paint First Lady Michelle Obama. The Baltimore-born artist won the Portrait Gallery's 2016 portrait competition. The gallery says her work challenges stereotypes with her life-size paintings of African Americans. The Obama's portraits will be unveiled at the National Portrait Gallery in D.C. in 2018.
Weekdays on.
And what happened? Well, first, before we show off the paintings, in case you haven't seen them yet, we are going to take a little bit of a look at the life of, was it Kendi Wiley, who is the painter of Barack Obama's portrait. So this is, I think he's in Brooklyn for this interview, and he has a collection at the Brooklyn Gallery, Brooklyn Museum, titled The New Republic. So this is a piece that was done up for that particular one. But this will give you a chance to understand a little bit more about his style and influences before we actually lead up to Obama's portrait.
Everyone is fascinated by looking at another human being. There's something very intimate about the ways that people assume that by looking at certain parts of the portrait, they'll be able to understand who these people are, where they come from, and why they happen to be in this museum today. In my work, I try to slow down and see individuals. I'm standing on the shoulders of all of those artists who came before me. But here there's a space for a new way of seeing black and brown bodies all over the world. A New Republic is an exhibition that allows for every single moment within my career, all of the different acts, all of the different bodies of work to be seen. What you get is a diversity of experiences, a picture of what black American kids are up to, a picture of what the global story is with regards to how young people adorn themselves and celebrate and fall in love. It's really interesting to be able to look through the history of some of the great portraits and to say, what is it about the trappings of empire and power that we can use in the 21st century? What does it look like to be graceful? What does it look like to be proud, noble? How do you look at a young black man in American society? It's a very important question, especially at this moment in our culture. The way in which the body is seen has a lot to do with light. How does the artist choose to allow light to flow across the body? For the last 10 years, I've been obsessed with stained glass. What I wanted to do was to create a body of work in which empathy and the language of the religious and the rapturous all collided into one space. Black women have always been at the core of my thinking around portraiture. You see so many portraits where the male figure stands dominant at the forefront of the painting, and women and children and land are seen in equal measure as possessions. In my own work, the women are strident. They take the front. But there's also a sense of mystery. We don't really know who these women are. Bound is a sculptural project that looks at the presence of black women, all of those women that raised me, the graceful women who've been in my life over the years, but also the ways in which black American women adorn themselves as both a type of communication act and armor. And hair is principle within that. You see hair going outside of itself, becoming so fabulous, so extraordinarily large that it folds in under its own weight. It's beauty that becomes decay. It's a place in which the imagination starts to happen. The Brooklyn Museum is extraordinarily important for me. I remember having my first exhibition here. Being able to celebrate this moment in a place like Brooklyn, where so many of the people who are in these paintings come from, is an incredible blessing. In some sense, what I'm trying to do is to come to terms with the ways in which Black American culture has been beamed out into the rest of the world. And that is a type of new republic.
Now, I hope you did take a closer look as best you could at some of the paintings that he's done. Clearly, the guy knows how to paint. Fantastic job in a lot of his work. I can already tell you that. Now, there's one little bit of controversy involving sperm. He does put his little trademark, sperm. I don't know why he's got sperm as a trademark, but that's his thing. It's an artistic thing. And even in a couple of the if you know what to look for, you could even see that in a couple of the paintings in the background where there were a few little sperm that were floating around on the canvas. I have no idea why they're there, but that's his thing. But that doesn't take away from the fact that he's got talent. Now, we're going to take a quick look behind the scenes at his studio, which is also a fascinating glimpse.
All art is about power, evidence of human presence, the people that we celebrate, the things that we're great at. Look directly in there. My name is Kehinde Wiley. Eyes at that camera. I'm an artist, I'm a painter. Great. Chin down slightly. You're in my studio today. Stay exactly where you are and then we'll just... My process has always been to work from photography. And what's happening is we're doing a really great photo shoot for Grey Goose. Chin towards me. Celebrating contemporary royals. To be a modern day king means that you've got swagger. Chin down slightly. Spike Lee.
I'm a big fan.
One of America's most celebrated visual thinkers. Eyes at the camera. Swizz Beatz, an important cultural leader in American music.
When Grey Goose asked me to be a part of this, and they mentioned Kehinde, they didn't have to finish his name, I said, I'm in.
Carmelo, I want you to look. Carmelo Anthony is one of those sports leaders that the world recognizes.
I'm excited, just to be here. Let the vibe flow and let the Grey Goose flow.
I was interested in rethinking the ways that kings are being made, and Grey Goose plays to the strengths of history. And let's bring in the dogs. Have you ever ridden a horse?
A lot of people gauge their concepts on things that they actually can see. But what about when you close your eyes?
Flying beyond is just taking life in general to the next level.
We can't be scared to take the risk, just like Kehinde's art.
We're done. My work is about the fact that what you see isn't always what you get. Flying beyond and pulling together your own bits and pieces. The world that's in front of you doesn't have to be the only one.
Each week.
That's a big clue right there. What you see is not always what you get. Now, to me, that would just mean that he would throw in a lot of symbolism. And that's kind of what he does. I mean, he takes people, and it's been admitted in numerous sources that what he does is takes a lot of the big named commissioned paintings from, say, the Renaissance or royal families, the stuff you would see at the huge art galleries, paintings that are like 400, 500 years old, and he recreates them and puts African Americans in as the characters where traditionally they wouldn't belong. That's a source of inspiration. And there's nothing wrong with that, because he is a talented artist, and to use that kind of backdrop to bring out royalty isn't necessarily a bad thing. Not at all. I mean, not when you're creating a work of art, which would also be a work of fiction. So nothing there at all, except, this is my big caveat about what he does. His backgrounds are so impressive and so overwhelming that it underwhelms the subject. So he wants to take all of this ornate, royal paintings from the past and puts African Americans in a position of royalty. He just said that in one of those clips that we played. But what does he do with American royalty? He was commissioned to paint the President of the United States. That's as close to a royal family as we're going to get. How does he handle that? Well, we'll find out in just a minute. Before we do that, we should take a close look, and we can play these next two together. C-SPAN put together a two-part video series on presidential portraits with historian Mark Proctor. And let's take a look at presidential portraits at the National Portrait Gallery, because this is the place where the Obama painting by Kehinde Wiley is going to end up at. These are President Obama's peers. These are former American royalty. And as we head into President's Day weekend, that's the thing to keep in mind, that our presidents are our equivalent of royalty. This is going to be President Obama's legacy. What we're going to show you now is what his peers have done in the past. It's a high standard.
The Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. includes a permanent exhibit of presidential portraits. Former gallery director Mark Proctor gave American History TV a tour of a portion of the exhibit to discuss the art and politics of presidential portraits. This look at presidential portraits is part two of a two-part program.
The Portrait Gallery is not, above all, a museum of art. So many of the portraits, even those I do like and think work very well in evoking a presidency, might not show up in an art museum as art museum. So it's not about the art. It's more about that historical responsibility of memory, that for many people, the portraits that they see here, and remember, we want them to be important. To them, we want them to be done, best case, while the person was president, from life, on and on. As long as these factors are there, we're certainly going to consider showing it. Very often, there aren't very many portraits of presidents. That might surprise people and gets me into the question of what is a portrait, because there are many photographs of the modern presidents. And so we take what we can get and then have the discussion about what's not in the portrait as a way to understand that presidency too. Now let's talk a little bit about photographs and portraits, because of course every president is photographed these days, ever since photography was invented. And sometimes those photographs do very well, better than certain painted portraits, to evoke them. For example, Harry Truman. I think we have a rather pedestrian portrait of Harry Truman as painted, but I think we have an amazing photograph, the one most people know who knew Truman, which is Truman holding up the newspaper that says "Dewey wins," and glowing with having outfoxed the pundits. That sort of thing is very important. However, there is something about, and I guess it's my job to explain what it is, and it's hard, about a painted or sculpted portrait that feels eternal. Doesn't mean sometimes that it's even as good as a photograph in evoking somebody, but it has that quality of something fixed for the ages. And also, it has that quality of the cooperation between artist and subject. But there's a sense of a portrait not being, that is painted or sculpted, not being a moment in time, but all time. And the fact is, the process of painting it took months too, so there's consideration and reconsideration and so forth. So we don't say we banish photographs from the National Portrait Gallery. We adore them, and they're in our permanent collection. But to secure this notion of the universal presidency, the painted portraits seem to work the best.
As you may have guessed, I don't think there is anybody in my family who has ever had a portrait done, let alone a portrait that will be hanging in the National Gallery. I'm also thinking about all of the young people, particularly girls and girls of color, who in years ahead will come to this place and they will look up and they will see an image of someone who looks like them hanging on the wall of this great American institution. I know the kind of impact that will have on their lives because I was one of those girls.
You exist in our minds and our hearts in the way that you do because we can see ourselves in you. The act of Michelle Obama being her authentic self became a profound statement that engaged all of us. Because what you represent to this country is an ideal.
Woo! How about that? That's pretty sharp. What I was always struck by whenever I saw his portraits was the degree to which they challenged our conventional views of power and privilege, and the way that he would take extraordinary care and precision and vision in recognizing the beauty and the grace and the dignity of people who are so often invisible in our lives. His initial impulse maybe in the work was to also elevate me and put me in these settings with, partridges and scepters and thrones and chiffon-robes and mounting me on horses. And I had to explain that I've got enough political problems without you making me look like Napoleon. We've got to bring it down just a touch.
So how do you explain that a lot of that is just simply not true? This is our humanity. This is our ability to say, I matter. I was here. The ability to be the first African-American painter, to paint the first African-American president of the United States is absolutely overwhelming.
That may have been an overwhelming experience for him. Unfortunately, compared to what we've seen out of his works, it's an underwhelming experience for the rest of us. As Mark Proctor said, it's got to be something that it's a quality of something that's fixed for the ages. That's what a presidential portrait should be. What we saw compared to what Obama, probably a little bit of hyperbole, talking about Napoleon, sitting on horses and all that. But the truth is, really for the National Portrait Museum, the quality should have been bumped up a notch. Now, there's nothing wrong with the painting from a painting perspective. There's more of a problem from a perspective of where the painting will be placed. When you are in the National Portrait Gallery with all of your presidential peers, you should have something that's up to that standard. And I personally don't think that it meets that standard. Now, I say this as a historian, but if you take a look at the way art critics are trained, you look at the way that tea testers are trained, you look at the way that wine testers are trained, they're not trained on what do you think, what's your personal preference. They are trained as to this is good, judge it this way, this is bad, judge it that way. Get used to this taste. And when you're at the presidential level at the National Portrait Museum, that's the standard in which I'm using in judging this painting. It's from an artistic perspective, it's not bad. From the perspective of where it is going to be placed, it's underwhelming. I really think that they could have done a much better job. Considering what we've seen from passed on the internet shortly after this came out. By the way, there is a little bit of symbolism. If you remember, when President Obama took the oath of office, he did it on Lincoln's Bible. This was unveiled on Lincoln's birthday. Abraham Lincoln was born February 12th, 1809. So he would have been 209 years. 209th anniversary of the birth of President Lincoln, Obama unveils that. It's the way it goes. So let's take a look at what they have done with the portrait on the internet. First, we're going to start with the actual portrait itself. So that's what we see for the portrait. Again, underwhelming. There's a little bit of symbolism there. We don't have enough time to get into it all. Every time I see the chair, I think of Clint Eastwood and his empty chair rhetoric from the 2012 election. So let's move on to the next. And there's a suitable photo or picture of Obama, perhaps as he's been known throughout the years. Next one. But that's not to say that Al Franken didn't try to get in on the act either. And there's President Obama looking at the current occupants of the White House, President Trump and Vice President Pence. And that's a suitable background for that photo. Next. And of course, there's an edgy and graceful, at the same time, a perfect choice by President Obama to put Chris Christie in the photograph. And many people still believe that Chris Christie was responsible for Barack Obama's re-election in 2012. Next. And of course, this is how President Trump views the portrait of Barack Obama. So as we leave you today, we are going to go with the U.S. presidential portraits, starting with President Obama, and we're going to show you going all the way back to President George Washington. And for Dallas Pearson, producer, I'm your host, Jeff Williams, reminding you that there's only 312 shopping days left until Christmas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.